Hi again guys, and welcome to episode 17 of Global Contenders, the review series for the touring car lineup of Gran Turismo 6 in particular, and this particular pick is another one of the Skyline, or at the very least GTR based fictional touring cars on the game, and like many of the other fictional touring cars, this is inspired by some of the styling of some real race cars. Now the R32 touring car, for instance, is very clearly and obviously inspired by the Le Mans GT1 Skyline. This car, on the other hand, looks much more like a vehicle that would be inspired by, for instance, the Tomica Racing R31 Skyline, which was on Gran Turismo 2, I believe, and also Silhouette race cars in general. And Silhouette race cars look fantastic. They have insanely huge body kits. They generally have a portion of the bodywork chopped away so that they sit much lower to the ground, in a similar way to some GT6 cars. And they're just really cool looking cars, especially the older ones. They have this raw, aggressive look to them, as though they're extremely dangerous but also extremely fast and powerful if you drive them and tune them well. And that's actually the vibe that this car gives off, of being powerful and effective. The Skyline is always a very effective track car, and just looking at them, they look like they're there to get the job done. And to me, this car looks exactly like that. It's a great looking touring car. The fact that it's technically not a real machine doesn't really even matter in the case of this car. It's just a really nice looking motor. Now, as far as spec, all of the Skyline touring cars are really impressive, and they do tend to get better with each generation, at least on paper. That being said, don't give short thrift to the older ones, because this car still puts out some seriously impressive numbers. In many ways, in fact, it's actually superior, even in this much older form, to many of the real DTM cars. Now, as far as engine, you're running, as you'd probably assume, a 2.6 litre engine, as most Skylines do, and you're putting out, fully tuned of course, 838 horsepower. So, more than enough to get the job done, and as I said, more than most of the other touring cars in the game, apart from, of course, some, such as the other Skylines. As far as torque, you're looking at just under 600 foot-pounds, 598, which, again, from a 2.6 litre engine is impressive, to say the least. It's pretty light, 1145 kilos, not amazingly light, given how light you'd probably hope and perhaps expect it would be. It is certainly heavier than many of the other all-wheel drive touring cars like the Calibra, the Alfa Romeo, etc. But still, 1145 kilos definitely isn't too much. That's still lighter than a GT500 car, for instance. As far as horsepower per tonne, it's very high, thanks to the combination of strong power and relatively low weight. 732 horsepower per tonne is serious territory, even for a race car. And as far as PP, it's not quite as high as some of the others, as you'd expect, but 634 PP, I would say, is a very useful level for this car to be at. That is the lowest of all of the Skyline touring cars, but at the same time, that's pretty well matched to stuff like the CLK touring car and various others, the Astra touring car as well, and also cars beyond the touring car class, stuff like GT machines as well. As far as price, this is the cheapest of all the Nissan GTR based touring cars, but not by much. It's only £1,000 cheaper than the next model at 233,000 credits, but even so, that's a really good price. Less than $250,000 credits for a machine that has the specs, in some cases better specs, than cars which cost 1.2 million, not 0.2 million. So the value for money on this thing is potentially really good, just like with the road-going version. So the question is, does it translate those really impressive raw specs into actual performance? Because as far as race cars go, even when you're talking about GTRs, not all of them are that great. Some of them are a little underwhelming. So, is this one of those, or is it a good one? Well, I would say it's a very good one. It's a premium for a start, as the other GTR touring cars are, but on Gran Turismo that's something that should never be taken for granted. It's always cool to have a premium model, and it is a great looking car, and all the better for it. You can, of course, like the other GTR touring cars, paint a portion of the bodywork, which is always a nice feature to have. It allows for more personalisation, and personally, I value that. As far as its pure performance, not necessarily just in fully tuned form, but in general, it's very good. In particular with regard to the handling. And not just the handling, the cornering speeds that this car can achieve thanks to the handling. Because of course, it's no use having a ridiculous amount of power if you can't take a corner. This car most definitely can take a corner, extremely well. And the fact that it has so much power means that although the top speed isn't as strong as some other touring cars, and it's not as powerful as the other Skyline touring cars, it's still more than fast enough to give pretty much any other touring car a great run for their money. The all-wheel drive means that of course you get better all-weather control, and just better control in general, more grip, and it is also a little bit more beginner-friendly due to it. Now, as far as which Skyline you should buy, we've kind of touched on this before when I talked about the R33, and although you could assume that they'd probably all be fairly similar, they have a similar paint scheme, they have a similar spec, at least in stock form, stock of course being relative, they have very similar prices, only a grand or two between them, and even the PP doesn't vary too much between them, at least before fitting upgrades. So overall, although they're all brilliant touring cars, I would recommend the R32 version in particular to someone who is more focused on pure handling and cornering speed and a more aggressive touring car, and basically just gets the job done. So it goes without saying that it's a great car to check out for racing, and that's it for this pick overall. So I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.